Okay. Okay, so we are going to start our review of subsection 5 and onwards. Maybe we'll do 5 through 12 today. Okay, so I'm going to share the screens right now. Let's see if we can do that. Share screens. Here we go. Okay, so in the last week, we went through the mitzvah of loans, and it's the highest form of tzedakah. Okay, and we also discussed the Chafetz Chaim in his sefer called Aves Chesed talks about the importance of making gemachim. A gemach is a free loan society, and they have to have responsible people running it, and they have to know how to utilize it properly and make sure who to lend money to, how much is fair amounts, and do it in a very responsible way. We also in last week in Halacha Bet 2 discussed about the prohibition of acting as a noshe, which is a person who's trying to be a collector, where they're trying to collect from someone who doesn't have the money, and that's a prohibition in the Torah. We said, however, in Sif Bet, in subsection, when I say subsection Sif, it's the same thing. Sif is a Hebrew word for the word subsection. So in Sif Bet, it explained that that's when you know for sure he doesn't have money, and you know for sure he doesn't have assets. But if you don't know, then it's not prohibited. Therefore, it's very rare to really say that someone could be transgressing this prohibition in today's day. Okay, now, we also learned in Sif 4, Sif Dalit, that person cannot hold back payment when they have it. And to tell them come back, that's a prohibition. That is a transgression of a verse in the book of Mishlei from Shlomo HaMelech, which says, "Don't tell your friend come back and when you have the money with you." I asked a question last time that in Alter Rebbe in the laws of stealing, not in the laws of loans that we're doing currently, but in the laws of Gezela, which is stealing, the Alter Rebbe in subsection 4 explains that there could be also a biblical conjunction, a biblical prohibition of that lo sashak, which means you can't hold back payment. Now, the literal meaning of lo sashak is usually in that context says if you have money owed to you, okay, and not owed to you, you owe someone money, like they did work for you, and you're like, I'm not going to pay you. Or you're not necessarily saying it to them, but you're constantly thinking in your mind, you don't want to pay them. That's lo sashak. So why is it that by loans, Alter Rebbe only says that it's a rabbinical prohibition? So I asked Rab Nachmanson, who's a dayan from Rehovot, I said that it's seemingly a contradiction in the wording, and he answered me that in the laws of Gzela, where it says that you're transgressing on the biblical prohibition of withholding payment, and it uses the expression of a loan, it doesn't mean the loan as we use in a regular context. It's talking about withholding wages. And it uses an expression which we find loan can even be an expression by anything. I owe you money, a loan. Why? I owe you through a loan. I owe you through withholding payment. I owe you through rent. It's all. I mean, you could almost classify anything as a loan, but it's not really, in essence, really a loan the way we're talking about when we talk about giving money. Now, here's where we start new grounds, which is Siphe, and the question is, what happens? What happens if a person cannot come up with the money for the loan? This is a big problem, right? You don't have them. You had good hopes. You lent them the money, and they can't come up with the money. Now what? So in Sifhei, Alter Rebbe says a few very important points. First of all, he says, number one, you have to make sure that you know who you are starting a loan with, even though it's a mitzvah min Torah to give a loan to someone. Someone comes to you and says, I need to borrow $50 to pay up some grocery bills. So you give them the money, it's a mitzvah, but for the loan, right? However, you have to know who you're dealing with. So if you know that the person that is asking you for money is not a trustworthy person, it's not a mitzvah to give them. And Alter Rebbe says very interestingly, he says it actually could be that if you know that he is the type of person who's not trustworthy, it's better that you should not lend him the money than by you lending him, and then you're going to have to come and run after him and try to ask him to pay you, which could be a biblical prohibition, like we learned in the second sif, which talks about not trying to be a collector when you know he doesn't have and you're still asking him. You're transgressing a Torah prohibition. So he says, better don't lend him in such a case. And then he also says that a person who's borrowing, it's forbidden for them to borrow money and just wasteful spending. You have to know who you are dealing with. You have to know that if you're dealing with a person, if you borrow money, you just have to spend responsibly. You should invest in making money back or on food or something, but to spend on luxuries or something, and then you're going to come up with nothing and you won't have the money, ultimately that is forbidden. There's a pasuk in Tehillim which says, Love Rasha v'lo yeshalem. A borrower, a wicked borrower who does not pay. You see from here that the Torah looks very negative at somebody who borrows money but can't pay it back. So then in Sifhei, which we're up to over here, the Alter Rebbe quotes from the Gemara in Erechim, which is 23b. If anyone wants to look that up afterwards on Erechim 23b, it's a Mishnah over there, where it says that, let's say a person says, I am making a value of myself and I want to give it to the Beit HaMikdash property. And he gives, let's say, I'm worth 100 silver coin, whatever it is. So we say, if he doesn't come up with the money, so he's indebted to the Beit HaMikdash, so we can seize from him. The Mishnah over there says that they collect from everything that he owns to pay up the debt, and they leave for him 30 days of food and clothes for 12 months. For his wife and kids, you don't need to leave anything over. He has to support them, this is true, but that doesn't override the money that he owes to a debt. And from that Gemara, where although it's only talking about the Beis HaMikdash property, it's not limited only to Beis HaMikdash property. It applies also to even other, any debt. So from here, this is a concept in halacha called misadrin lebal chov. We arrange the money, how much he's owed, and we give it over to the bal chov, to the person he owes money to. Okay, so now the problem is, and over there, in Alter Rebbe in the Sif, he goes on to say that if you have Svarim, you have to sell it. If you have a Sefer Torah, which is, you can't sell Torah, you're not allowed to sell it unless it's to marry, unless it's to build a mikvah. But other than that, you're not allowed to sell a Sefer Torah. But to pay a debt, yes, you can sell the Sefer Torah. Not only you can, but you need to, because it's so important to pay a debt. So there is this thing that debts don't go away with time. They don't get absolved with time or something. Even if it's 100 years, that doesn't mean that therefore the debt is gone. The debt stays. Okay, we just don't we don't add interest. We don't put extra fines or something on a person. We don't incur ribis, interest. However, the debt stays as a debt. Okay.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
You say even for 100 years, but what about Shemitah and Yovel?
Yeah. Okay. So in the end of the laws of loans, which starts from section let me give you the sif where it talks about the laws of loans. That starts on chapter subsection 34 through 39. 34 through 40, the last or 6 or so sifim, it talks about the Shemitah and the laws of loans, how it applies to the Shemitah year. And in general, yes, it's possible that the Shemitah could erase a loan. However, since we have a concept called prusbul, which we will learn about, which is this mechanism, which by contracting this mechanism called prusbul, it strengthens and it protects the loan, that the loan won't get erased. So and the truth is, there are even certain things that even without the prusbul, the Shemitah will not erase and not relinquish the loan. We will see there are some details involved in it, but most things it would erase. So the bottom line is that in all practical purposes, people today do make a prusbul, which means that they make a mechanism, a halachic mechanism, which protects their loans. So in essence, though, the loan does not get erased. theoretically, okay? So if that's the case, and it even says he has to sell his home to pay off a loan, okay? In the end of this section, in the Sif Hey, the Alter Rebbe says that if it's a weekday garment that he purchased for his wife or for his children, or even if it's a Shabbos garment of his wife, so then no, then they can't collect from that. But once it's already been purchased or so, we're not going to take it away from them. But to say that we should leave over money that he can buy clothes for his kids and wife, no, that we won't. We'll say we only leave him with 30 days for food and 12 months of clothes for him, or the value of it, right? But if he already purchased children's clothes and women's clothes, that they don't take away. But we see from here the severity of the issue. So now, if that's the case, think about this for a moment. According to halacha, we have what's called misadra in the Baal Chayv, that we collect all the debt from a person. But today, I will tell you, I'm going to fast forward now 2020. In almost all Beis Dins around the world today, it's basically standard practice that Beis Din does not assume the authority. I'm telling you in practice, right? If you'll actually have a debt case with somebody and you claim them in a Beis Din, so the Beis Din will help or try to help to settle the matter and try to collect the debt. However, in practice, if it comes down to it, let's say the lender says, okay, look, he has a car, he has a house, make him sell the house, make him sell the car. Beis Dins in practice today don't exercise this power of what the Gemara talks about and what's mentioned in Sifhei. They don't force the debtor to sell his car, sell his extra furniture, his Sefer Torah, or his home. They're not doing it simply because the jurisdiction of Beis Din today is not as strong as it was in the past. And therefore, that's a very big consideration a person needs to take. If you're not sure of the credibility of the borrower, you have to be very careful with who you're dealing with, because there isn't that much what you can do if they don't pay up. Now, it's true that vast majority of people who borrow do pay up, and it's 5% of people don't end up paying or something like that. And the vast majority are honest and they're going to make their effort. But there are some times in which a person could get themselves into a tremendous amount of debt and they won't be able to pay you back. And the Beis Din doesn't use the mechanism of selling everything the person has. So although you would be allowed to ask them nonstop, okay, but practically speaking, that doesn't mean you're actually going to get your money. So therefore, in practice, it doesn't say this in Alter Rebbe here, although he talks about it later on in the general siman of the laws of Halvah that will be learning. It's very advisable today that people should lend money, even if they're going to get a contract, which we're going to learn in a moment. There is a very importance of taking a collateral. Again, depending on the person. If the person is someone you more or less trust them, so fine. So you don't need to. But if it's someone you're really not sure about, it would be either highly advisable to either get a co-signer, like a person who will, here, let me put it. It would be highly advisable to either have, again, I'm just repeating over the question that nowadays that Beis Din they do not have the authority in practice to collect assets from people and go into their house and make them pay up a car or something. So it's important that when you're loaning money to someone and you're not sure of their credibility and you still want to lend them.
Resman.
Huh?
It's Shulchan Aruch on business law.
Yes. What are you saying? Oh, Moshe, you wanted to say something, or should I mute you? You can unmute yourself whenever you would like if you want to say something. So because if you're not 100% sure on the person, it's very important that you should take a collateral from them. If you trust them, then you don't need. Another option, one more thing. Another option would be that you have a person who will be a guarantor if they want to bring forth a guarantor. So by most gemachs, a gemach, they don't ask people to bring a collateral. It's just really difficult and it's not comfortable for most people. So they usually a very responsible gemach will say, okay, give us a guarantor to sign. We're giving you a $10,000 loan. Who's going to be your guarantor? You know. Okay, and if someone wants to say or ask anything or whatever, feel free at any time.
Rabbi, my question is regarding the Beit Din not collecting on the assets. Can they provide a judgment? Can they allow you to get a secular judgment that you can enforce in secular court? Is that, or are you saying that's something that they?
Yeah. Beit Din can exercise the ability of the secular courts if they see that the person is not willing to listen to them. But you know, even the secular courts, there is also a very big limitation. The secular courts are not going to say, okay, sell everything that you have, that you only have 30 days of food and 12 months of garments. Even the secular courts would not punish a person that much. Not punish, but they wouldn't. So let's say they're going to say, yeah, go to secular court. We give a hedge, this guy's not listening. We give a allowance. But in practical terms, they're not going to force you to sell your car or something. I will talk about, but I'm thinking, okay, you know what? We'll talk about it now as well. So I was thinking maybe I'd do next week. No, it's okay. We could do now. All right. So maybe what I'll do is we'll revisit this on Wednesday if I missed out any important points. So since we're talking about that, so then it brings up the question about bankruptcy. So when you file for bankruptcy, the court issues an order called an automatic stay. And the automatic stay is a term that can be really on many other types of cases, not limited only to bankruptcy. It stops creditors from collecting on the debts you owe them during the bankruptcy process. In most cases, the stay kicks in the moment you file for bankruptcy, regardless of the type of bankruptcy. There's business bankruptcy, and then there's personal bankruptcy, okay? So then they give what's called here. Okay, so again, we're talking right now about bankruptcy. You know, if you learn Sif Hey, you see that you're they try to collect money from you whenever you do or don't have. So now a person files bankruptcy and they get this protection called the automatic stay. So now it brings us to the question, which is that the courts, and a secular court, can give what's called a discharge. A discharge is where they say you pay up whatever amount you have. They say, okay, let's see what you do have. Okay, pay all this up, whatever it's going to be, and the rest you're discharged. The rest you're off the hook. So the debt discharge, which of course not, the judge might not grant a discharge if they see you have extra money, or you have that you don't give receipts or something. But if the judge is convinced, they'll give a debt discharge. So the question is, does this hold up in halacha? So we have two issues over here regarding a debt discharge. Number one, halacha requires repayment of debt and does not. There is no idea in halacha called, which fits with the concept of a discharge, a bankruptcy discharge. So it doesn't exist. But society has made such a law. So what does halacha have to say about that? Number two, halacha generally prohibits litigation between courts in secular courts. Between Jews and secular courts. In other words, two Jews cannot go to secular court, even if they both agree to do so. Okay, it's a violation of the Torah. It's if you go to Parshas Mishpatim, you learn the first Rashi there. In Parshas Mishpatim, it says, these are the Mishpatim, the laws that you shall put in front of them. And Rashi on there brings the Gemara, which says, Hasim Lifnehem, placed in front of them, meaning in front of the Jewish courts and not in front of the non-Jewish courts. You can't go to a secular court to settle a dispute, right? So that's a second issue. If you're going to go to a secular court, then all of a sudden, what happened to the Jewish laws? So here is a general summation of opinions of poskim on bankruptcy. Maybe next week, not next week, maybe this Wednesday, I'll revisit it and add anything that I didn't really mention now, but I think this is a general summation of the topic. Number one, we have a concept called dina de malchus dina, which is the law of the land is the law. Okay. Now, and that's a concept mentioned in Talmud in a couple different places. So you'll say, okay, very nice, the law of the land is law, but does that mean any law in the land of whatever country you live in, whether it's the United States or Canada or England or wherever it may be, that becomes law, even if it's contrary to Torah law? So we can't say that it applies to everything, okay? So then the question is, so what does the definition of the law of the land is law? When will it dictate and override the halachic regime? And when will it not be able to override the halachic regime? Okay, so we have here three general approaches, and truth is, behold, there's even another approach, but I'm going to just give you the most general approaches that of what is the scope of the law of the land is the law. Again, the law of the land, the reason why bankruptcy is the law of the land is because the government considers this a benefit to society, that there should be this concept there, where you can have a fresh start. And that was adapted in many countries. And just like they also believe that, you need to have red lights, green lights, and you have to have a speed limit, and you have to have, if you don't pay your taxes, you can get put possibly in prison. And all of these things have to do because the government feels that this is what's needed in order to keep this country in its proper form. If it's not going to get its revenues through its services, and if people are going to treat people in a way where they are, that's why the government also has in some states or cities the rule of rent control. They don't want that houses or homes should be too expensive in a way where people can't afford. There should be affordable homes. So so there's all types of regulations that the government has, and that's the general meaning of the dina de malchus dina. The law of the land is law. But unlike rent control, where okay, fine, Torah doesn't prohibit how much you charge, but it doesn't forbid if the government's going to say what they think should be a price limit. But when it comes to the law of the land by bankruptcy laws, technically that is not fitting at all with the Torah. The Torah says you got to pay a debt, and if you don't, you're stealing. Comes along the bankruptcy law and it says, no, you're off the hook. So if you fulfill the bankruptcy law, you will be, according to Torah, a goslin, a Torah level thief. So how then do we put it all together? So there is a famous Ramah, Ramosha Isserlis, in chapter 369.8, if anyone wants to look that up. It's in Choshen Mishpat, in the laws, chapter 369, Sif 8. The Ramah there rules that basically direct welfare of the government entity. He says it applies much more broadly to cases in which a law is made to improve society. Okay, so in other words, let's say it's the toy ellis of the city members. The government wants, for whatever reason, so that people will be able to have easier life. So they made this law, and it's a sweeping law. It's not for only the non-Jews, or only for the Jews, or for only this, or only that, or for minority groups. It's for everybody. It's got to be for everybody. And then the Ramah says it applies. Okay, that would be, and then it becomes a halachic law. Okay, as opposed for the government's perception of justice. Okay, if the government's doing things which are not even fitting with justice, then of course that would not be considered the law of the land is law. During times of when the KGB was persecuting the Jews or something, that's not the law of the land. That's a persecution. Okay. There is the view of the Shach, a very famous Shach, although he's quoted not in the laws over there, but he's in the laws of loans in chapter 73, subsection 39. He argues that even when done to ostensibly improve society, if that was the intent of the government, why they made that law. But a law that contradicts the Torah is not acceptable between Jews. And the reason he says is because if we are going to adapt all the laws which are by the government, even if they contradict Torah law, then there will be no Torah, because every single law you can say is going to could contradict the Torah. Like we know, there are inheritance laws, father, his son, his son inherits him. According to Torah law, girls do not inherit. And if we're going to say, well, all secular law does not accept that law of the Torah, they say that girls, boys, they're all equal. There's no law of a firstborn getting double portion or something. It's all the same. And they will say that it's fair to make them all the same. But in Torah law, that's not the case. So the Shach was very concerned if we're going to adapt secular laws which are for the benefit of society, and then say, well, that becomes the law of the land. So the Chassam Sofer follows the Ramaz approach with a slight clarification. Now, to go into the top of Din de Malchus Din, there is much what to discuss. And since we're only really talking in the laws of loans right now and bankruptcy, so in short, I'll bring you what the Moshe Feinstein in his Igros Moshe, Choshen Mishra chapter, volume 2, Siman 62, he basically takes the Ramaz approach. He says that if there was I think it was actually in reference to the Swedish bankruptcy laws, where basically the story was as follows, that there was a Jewish borrower who borrowed from a lender, Jewish lender, and this Jewish borrower owed to a lot of people. And now the person who was, I guess, summoned him to a Din Torah was asking Reb Moshe, he wants to have the first share. Now, he knew that this person made a stay of order that we mentioned. Stay of order is where, right, it protects an automatic stay, where it protects the person you're not allowed to go after him. So the person was saying, well, yeah, okay, there is a bankruptcy stay of order, but I don't want to lose out. I don't want to lose out my fair share, right? So the bottom line is that he wanted to say, can we go around the stay of order, and can we collect from the person, the debtor? Okay, can we collect from him? Reb Moshe held and wrote in the tshuva there, no, you cannot go around the stay of order law. And it wasn't that he was saying that simply because he was afraid that the court could sue or summon the Beis Din and sue them or something or punish them. It wasn't at all the reason. He held, and his reasoning was because the society, the government feels that it will not be safe and it will not be fair if a person could have a stay of order ruling, and see that some people can pick around the system and still collect. They'll go to their Beit Din, and their Beit Din will say, yeah, you can collect nonetheless. And then they're going to find out that some people are collecting behind the back of the courts through the permission of a Beit Din. And that will be very chaotic and very troubling. And it could cause a lot more damage than help. So he was of the view that the bankruptcy, there's something called Act 7, Act 11, but he says, it wipes off the debt. At least, it's an interesting tshuva from Reb Moshe. The Chelkot Yaakov, however, did not accept that view. The problem, he would say, no, Gezel is Gezel. Not paying a debt is considered stealing. There's no way out of that. The only problem is that you're going to have to get into legal problems. Usually when these scenarios happen, Beis Dins have to be very concerned how they'll deal with the case. Because if they're going to take on the case and try to demand payment from a person who filed for bankruptcy, that Beis Din could come into big legal issues, could get into big problems. And there was actually a case that happened.
Rabbi, I think you signed off.
What? Okay, 1 second.
You froze for a moment.
Did you hear me now? Do you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So if a Beis Din will take the case, they could possibly get sued. And there was a famous case that took place a couple years ago in which there was a yeshiva that owed money to a few different, people, And apparently it was taken into, I'll try to, I'll look up the name of this case and I'll try to send it on an email to you guys if you want to look up the case afterwards. But basically, it was a problem that they were taken to court. They filed bankruptcy, and someone brought them to Beis Din, and they sent the plaintiff or the defendant. They sent them a siruv. A siruv is where you send a summons to the defendant, and if the defendant refuses to come and doesn't choose of a different Beis Din, then they're put in a siruv. A siruv is it's a stigma against somebody where the Beis Din basically says you refuse to show to court and to Beis Din, and it's a spiritual stay away order. It's like basically this person doesn't listen to halacha. So the person sued, brought the court to Beis Din. On the opposite, not they didn't take the court to Beis Din, they brought the Beis Din to court, and then it was a whole legal battle about the interpretation of the First Amendment, the Establishment Clause, where if you follow the Establishment Clause, which there's a freedom of religion, and that religion is not subject to court laws, so then that would be a big bit of a step over the Establishment Clause. And if I'm not mistaken, when I think it was challenged in Supreme Court or so, the conclusion of to the best of my knowledge at the moment, was that they don't consider the bankruptcy law an infringement of the Establishment Clause, the infringement of the First Amendment, because they explain that, or they hold, the court holds, again, doesn't mean this becomes halacha, but I'm just telling you what moment is the story, and that's why Beis Din would be quite cautious to take on a case on themselves, is because they say that basically they're taking the view of how to say that when it's for the benefit of everyone and it's not clearly against halacha, clearly against religion, so they're not forcing you to do something, they're just relinquishing debt according to what they consider to be needed for society. So the bottom line is that a Beis Din will most likely not want to take upon a case if somebody did file for bankruptcy. Whether or not they need to pay afterwards, there's room to say they should, but again, in the legal system, it's a bit of a problem to go and force the person to pay. But on their own issue, it seems to be that there's a need to pay. But it could be that you could rely on the view of Rav Moshe Feinstein that you're off the hook, apparently, if the court had cleared up matters. Okay, now let's move on a bit. We're going to go to subsection Sivav. We're up to here now. So now, if you lend without a contract, this is a big problem. What happens when you want to give a loan to someone? So you think, okay, I'm going to give them a loan. How much do you need? $100. Here's $100. So now the problem is that if a person doesn't make a contract, they are transgressing a serious violation. Now, the Rebbe in Sifav says that if you lend money without witnesses and without any contract, you're transgressing the prohibition of do not place a stumbling block before the blind. One is not required to have a halachic contract. It is enough to have a simple IOU with the person's signature, but that is required. The Gemara in Bava Metzia brings a story that Ravina and Ravashi, the great Talmudic codifiers, they were the last generation of the Talmud, so Ravashi needed to borrow some money. And Ravina says, I will lend you the money, but I need to make a contract first with you. So Ravashi says, even myself, you need to make a contract? So he says, certainly with you, more than even normal people. He says, because since you are so involved in your learning, you might forget altogether that I even gave you the loan. Whereas somebody who's more down to earth, they will not forget that they got a loan, and therefore they would pay you. So it's not the Chas v'Shalom assume that Ravashi, the great Ravashi, would not want to pay, but he could totally forget. There's a famous story that everybody who goes, in yeshiva, you hear this story. So in the back of the Gemara, there's a commentary called the Rashash. Reb Shmuel Strux, I believe his name was. So he was a brilliant Talmudic scholar, I think from Poland, if I'm not mistaken. And he the story is told over that he lent money. I'm sorry. Yes, he lent money to someone, and he was mainly a scholar, and he had a some small little business. But anyways, he lent money. He lent money to a storekeeper once, and the storekeeper came back to him one day to pay back the money, but he didn't. Um, Originally when they did the loan, they did it with a contract as proper and as is halachically required. But when he paid back, he was in the middle of his learning. He says, "Don't worry, you can put the money here." And he put the money in his Gemara, and he didn't. He says, "I'll write it down afterwards," and he forgot to write it down. He closed his Gemara. One day, a couple of weeks later or so, he looks in his papers to see who owes him money, and he calls the person, the storekeeper, to say, you need to pay the debt that you borrowed from me. And the guy says, "What do you mean? I paid you 2 weeks ago or so." And the Rav, the Rashash, he didn't remember. He didn't remember that the guy paid him. He was involved in his learning. He says, "No, you didn't pay me. What are you talking about? I would have written it down. I wouldn't have held my contract and not crossed it off or something." He says, "I paid you." Anyways, the word got out that there was a dispute between the Rashash, the great Rav of the town, and this storekeeper. And as you could assume, the people were going to assume that the storekeeper was being the dishonest one. They took the side of this famous Talmudic scholar. And I guess a couple of weeks later, or sometime later, he was going through his Gemara and he opened it up and he saw inside was the money. And then, and only then, he reminded himself that this was the money that he was paid back for the loan from the storekeeper. So he ran over to the storekeeper and he found him and he said, "I'm so sorry. I see that you did pay me. Now I remember. I didn't write it down then. It was my mistake. I want to make sure, is everything fine?" So he says, "No, Rabbi, I'll be honest with you. Things are not fine. I have a daughter who couldn't get married. And, they all say that I'm a liar. They say that I'm a ganef. So my reputation has been smeared, not because you said anything about me, but just the rumors have been speculating about me. And I think it's hurting her shidduchim." So the Rashash says, "You know what? I have a son of age of marriage. Your daughter is looking of age of marriage. Let's see if they can maybe want to get married." And of course, they met each other and they saw that they were a fitting match. And they ended up getting married. The daughter of the Rashash, I'm sorry, the son of the Rashash, and the daughter of this money lender. And he felt that this would be the only way to fix the reputation of this person that he had smeared. So you see from here that the countless, we can't rely on saying, "Well, it's fine. We don't need to make a contract." It's very important to make a contract. The Alter Rebbe says that, and it's a simple halacha, that there's a violation of lifnei iver lo sitin nichshol, of not placing a stumbling block in front of the blind. The Alter Rebbe then goes on to say that there's two other options. You can give a loan and collect a collateral, and that will be also fine, because if you have the collateral, that's in place of the loan. Hopefully he'll want his collateral back and he'll come up with the money. Also, you could have witnesses, and that would be fine. But the Alter Rebbe says that a contract is better than both witnesses and a collateral, because witnesses might disappear. One day the witnesses will travel somewhere and they'll be gone. However, the contract doesn't disappear so quickly. So therefore, the best idea is to use a contract. Okay, I'll just share a question that is asked by the Knesset Hagdola. And he says the following. Question is as follows. What will it help to lend in front of witnesses? We have a rule that one does not need to pay back in front of witnesses. And he could technically claim, "I paid you back." So if he says, "I can pay you back," and the halacha is, we believe you. Because if I borrow money with witnesses, I don't have to pay in front of witnesses. This is a rule. So now what will it help, therefore, if he's going to borrow and have witnesses there? He doesn't need to pay back in front of witnesses. They'll say, "I paid you back." So technically, if the whole purpose is to avoid someone from coming to a situation of lying, what will it help that we have witnesses? So I understand a contract is good, but what will it help witnesses? And if the truth is, the Alter Rebbe says that witnesses contract is better than anything else. Actually, if a person is not credible, as I mentioned earlier, the best thing to do with someone who's not credible is probably take a collateral, because then You know, if they don't come up with the money, you don't have to run after them. You could have a contract, but what's it worth? A person who's not reliable and does not pay up his debt, you could have a contract. I have people, let's say they gave me a check. What is it going to help me that he gave me a check? He owes me a check and it says on it $50. But the check is, no, it's not backed. The money, there's no money in the bank. That's not going to help me. Whereas if he gave me some item which is worth $50, okay, if he doesn't want to pay, I have the collateral. I'm not allowed to use it meanwhile, but if it's decided that it will be used as now recovering the payment, then it becomes mine at that point. Okay, so now going back to this idea. If a person just had witnesses, what's it really going to help? At the end of the day, he could say, I paid you back. The answer is, and this is from a sefer called Knesset Agdola, the answer is that if there would not have been witnesses, we are afraid that one can altogether deny the loan. However, when there is witnesses, we are not concerned of such a claim. So in other words, when there are witnesses, we've established a fact that a loan took place. Now, maybe the guy will say, oh, I paid back, and he's lying. Okay, it's possible he could do that. But then we have to come into a different discussion, which is who do we believe when there's a dispute between both of them, and that's already becomes more difficult on the liar to make a lie. However, when we're not even sure, if we don't have proof that the loan took place, it's really not in the benefit of the lender. So at least when we have established through witnesses, at least that the loan took place, or even better, a contract, then at least it's much easier to deal with and alleviate the problem. Okay, that's what the Knesset Agdola says. Okay, now in Siv Zayin, it goes on for a few sifim to talk about the concept called the collateral. Now there are a lot of psukim that talking about the collateral, and we shouldn't get confused. There are two types of collaterals. There is the collateral which is taken at the time of the loan, and then we have another type of collateral which is taken during the middle of the loan. There's a big difference between the two. When the collateral was taken before the loan took place, as the loan was taking place, so that's good. Why? Because then what ends up happening is that it's called a protection, right? But when it's being, and then it's permissible, and we'll see that a lot of the prohibitions and concerns that we have don't apply over there. But when it's being taken in the middle of the loan, there are more concerns. So let's see one by one. We'll go through all the laws. So in Siv Zayin, it says like this: if the shliach beis din, shliach means the messenger of the court. So if this messenger of the court, the shliach beis din, collects a collateral from a borrower, and by the way, if anyone has any questions, feel free to interrupt, say anything, ask, add, by all means. It's an open forum here. So if the shliach beis din collects a collateral from the borrower as a security for the loan, the idea in the middle of the loan, I lent money, I'm not getting money back, and I want to take a collateral. I'm afraid the guy's going to run away and not pay me. So I go to the beis din, and the beis din can go over and take some sort of security loan, security of some sort of collateral. The item needs to be returned to the borrower at the time when it needs to be used. So the Torah has many psukim talking about, for example, lo yisava alav hashemesh, the sun should not set on the person. Like if it was a pillow, for example, you need to return the pillow before it becomes nightfall. Again, if that's his only pillow. If he has plenty of them, then it doesn't make a difference. So, however, in subsection 15, Tesvav, the Alter Rebbe explains that a collateral that was taken from the time of the loan as a security, one does not need to return it at that time in which it would be needed for personal usage. Why? Because when the Torah says that you have to return the blanket at the nighttime, or you have to return the pillow at the nighttime, or you have to give the tools like the rake and all that stuff, the work tools that he uses during it. That's only when you collect it in the middle of the loan because you're afraid he's not going to come with money. When you took it before the loan started, then you don't have to. You can hold on to it. You don't have to give it. It's fine. That's number one. That's what we learned in Siv Zayin. I'm skipping now in 8 and 9. I'm going right to 10. In Siv 10, Siv Yud, it talks about taking the collateral from the widow of the divorcee. Okay? One does not take a collateral from a widow at all. Now, when we say at all, you have to put a little parentheses around it. There is an exception when we can take it. But generally, in the middle of the loan, and I go, hey, I need money, I need some collateral, and she's not, I gave her a loan, and she's not coming up with me, I'm not allowed to take a collateral. Collateral in Hebrew means a mashke. This is a biblical prohibition, as it says, do not take a garment of a widow, okay? And that's a beged, lo sachbo beged almanam. That's what the Torah says. Don't take the garment or some special collateral of the widow. Why are you not allowed to take the collateral of the widow? So the reason is that she is weak and she does not have support, not from her parents because she's already been married and she's already out of the house, assumably, and not from her husband who has passed away. And therefore, she's vulnerable. And taking a collateral from her in the middle of the loan is going to really ruin her morale, and it's not healthy for her. Based on that, the Smeh, one of the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch in chapter 97, Sifkat 22, he says that why would this be limited only to a widow? He says the same law would apply to a divorcee, like you see in the picture over here. The divorcee, she is downtrodden. She doesn't have a husband now. She's not maybe with her parents anymore. Okay? She's also vulnerable. So whatever we will apply to the widow, we should also apply to the divorcee. From here you see how tragic it is every time a divorce takes place. It's not a positive thing, right? It's like she becomes an almana. The Gemara tells us that when a woman gets divorced, it's like the mizbeach, the altar starts to cry. And it's like breaking of a home. It's a very sad thing.
So if you can't take collateral from her, can you avoid lending to her in the first place?
Well, again, if you don't think that she's a trustful person of paying, so you have the right to refuse to give her a loan. But the best thing to do is what it says right now. This will be the best thing to do. In subsection 11, it explains that one may take a collateral from a widow if she, on her own volition, agrees to give one. So here's what you do if you want to give a loan to a divorcee or you want to give one to a widow. You say, okay, I will give you a loan, interest-free loan, whatever, but I need a collateral for the loan. Or you could say, we didn't talk about that, will be maybe next week or so. I need an Erev. An Erev is a person, a guarantor. If you're not going to come with money, I want to have someone I can go and collect it from. So that's also fine. So practically speaking, the best thing to do is say, okay, what do you have of value that you can give me to hold on to until you come up with the money? And she says, okay, I have this necklace. It's worth the value of the loan. Okay, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to, how long is our loan will be for 30 days. Our loan is going to be for 2 months, for 1 year, whatever it's going to be. I'm not going to touch this thing. However, after, after a year, let's meet again and see where you're holding. And again, if he sees that she's, I'm sorry, I can't come with the money, it's not going to happen or so. So then you can arrange that the collateral will become his. Again, we'll have to make sure that he's not taking something more of the value, and the value has to be not an argument between the sides, it has to be clear cut between both of them. But that would be the simple best solution. Take a collateral. So again, generally speaking, people are not, necessarily looking after a collateral, but it depends on the value of the loan, right? The Aruch, I didn't mention this, but I'll mention it now. The Aruch HaShulchan talks about he decries the custom. He says, how can it be that people are loaning money to people, and often they're not writing any contract? As you say, it's an obligation to write a contract, or at least have witnesses. People lend money to people out of favors, and they don't make any contracts. So how can it be? It's basically a prohibition. The Gemara says it's forbidden. So he doesn't have any good solid answer. He just says, well, people trust each other so much, sometimes they don't feel a need. But the truth is even if you trust someone, it's not going to be too much help when they happen to forget. And it happens all the time. So it's really, really important to make sure that there is a contract. And knowing the situation, you should maybe get a collateral if you feel it's necessary, or a guarantor. I will say another thing on that note is that You know what? Let's move on for a moment. Cool. Now in subsection 12 talks about holding on to a collateral or collecting collateral as payment. This is very important. One who is collecting a payment, and you can see this in Sifyud base. One who is collecting a payment for the debt is not limited to the rules of returning the vessel which is used for preparing food. In other words, if you see in the earlier sifim, it talks about like, oh, if you collect an item which is used to prepare food, you have to make sure that person has those vessels when he needs them. So you'll have to return them in the morning time when he's using them to prepare his breakfast or lunch. Okay? And then it's very inconvenient. You got to go back and forth, give it to him, take it back, give it to him, take it back. But it says in Sifyud Beis 12, it says that when you're collecting, as I said earlier, there's a difference between having a security collateral and between saying, I want payment now. I want to take a collateral as payment. So if you're collecting it as payment for the debt, you are not limited to the rules that you have to return it or so back and forth when we're talking about a food item that you prepare food with. You know, no, now is payment time and I'm getting it. I don't have to return it after. The difference to collateral as security and collateral as payment is that when it is merely for security, it may not be used for personal needs. What happens if you use it for personal needs? It could be a question of a violation of ribit, of taking interest. That's why, let's say somebody says, here, take my car, and my car will be the collateral. Okay, very nice. But if it's not a payment collateral, it's only security, you're not allowed to use the car. You have to just park it somewhere and leave it. If you're going to use it one time, you're benefiting from the loan because it's not for usage. It's simply for holding on to security. So if you use it, it's like you're taking an interest off of the loan, which would be a violation violation. The only way in which you would be allowed to use the car is if you arrange with him, or whether it's a car or it's some other item where you can use and benefit from it. You'd have to arrange it and say, if I want to use your collateral, I need to deduct from the loan every time I use it based on our agreement of how much we think it's worth. So that is a very important rule to keep in mind. Okay, so this is for today. Next week, we're going to talk, not next week, but on Wednesday, we're going to talk about, we'll start SIF 13 and SIF 14 and 15, 16, maybe we'll do till maybe till 17 or so, where it's going to talk about any type of money that you owe someone. What do you do when you owe them money? Not necessarily that you borrowed money, but you just owe them money now, and now what do you do? How you can't come up with the money, what should we do now? So that'll be the next topic. And I'll send in the email some other topics that we'll be going through for Wednesday and the exact time when it'll take place. So again, in summation of what we learned today, we learned about the law of paying back someone when you don't have the money, how based in will go into your assets and just collect and leave you with the bare minimum, 30 days of food and 12 months of garments, which is based on the Gemara and Erech 23b. We said that today based in usually does not have that power, that authority today, so you have to be very concerned when you give loans to people, that keep in mind that very likely they could have a lot of assets and they're not physically forced to give them to you. So you're going to have to just consider very carefully how you give a loan to someone. We talked about, and that brings up an interesting question about, is it Lashon Hara? Would it be considered Lashon Hara if someone asks you, you think I can lend this person and they really need the loan, but you know that they're not trustworthy? Yeah, again, if you know that they're not trustworthy, it's not a Lashon Hara to say, it's not gossip or so to say that you shouldn't lend them. If you know professionally that they're just almost like a con artist, it would be the right thing to do. But that's something you have to really have certainty on. We spoke about in Sivav about the contract. A simple IUU is enough. We spoke about even the Talmud Chacham. Don't rely on the fact that he's Talmud Chacham. You have to make a contract. Witnesses is also enough. Sorry?
You cut out for a second. You said if you know he's a con artist, you don't have to. You can stay, and you don't need.
Right. If you know that he's a con artist, then you should not lend him, and it will not be considered gossip or lashon hara to tell the lender and say, by the way, this person is really not trustworthy. I know that he borrows money all the time and he doesn't pay back. Actually, unfortunately, I know a person like that, in which I found out a little too late. But okay, so you have to, that's why today you want to be extra careful. If people you're not so sure about, maybe you'd say, I'll lend you if you give me collateral, which is fine. And we spoke about the collateral. We explained the difference of taking the collateral as a security of the payment or between taking it as an actual payment, that when it's a security, you're not allowed to use it. When it's payment, it becomes yours. Okay, we went about.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah.
Safe base, right?
Yeah. Yes.
I'm not sure if it was safe base. Maybe it was one of the later safing. It says if you know he's not trustworthy, he said something along the lines of like take collateral or like don't do it, right?
If days it says that you're not allowed to ask somebody money when you know that they don't have. That's what Sif base is.
So in that regard, like let's say you accidentally lend it to somebody that is not trustworthy and you were not able to collect.
Right.
Do you lose the schus or the schar from the mitzvah?
No. You can make a condition in your mind before you give the loan. If it's the type of person where you say, I'm going to give him a loan because I feel it's a mitzvah, and you say in your mind, you don't tell him this, that if you don't end up paying me, I will be Michael. I'll consider it like tzedakah. Another time, not today, we will talk about if you need to inform the person. Let's say there was a guy you gave a loan to a friend, 2 years, 3 years has gone by, he hasn't even paid you. And you're like, I want to consider it tzedakah. The question is, do you need to inform him that you forgave him of the loan and therefore you made it as tzedakah, or you don't need to tell him? We will see that it's a very big question, because it could be that you must tell him. In other words, if you don't, it's not considered like you're now giving him as a gift. We'll get into it, but that's to come. That's to come. There is a discussion about it. If mechila, if when you forego a loan, is it considered matana? Is it considered as a gift, or is it considered releasing the debt? And if whether it may be, do you have to tell them or not? And the general approach is you should tell them, as we will go on to learn about that. We spoke about the divorcee and the widow, how you cannot take from them a collateral in the middle of the loan as a security. However, that's only when in the middle of the loan. You say, hey, you're not coming with the money. I want a security to support my loan. But if you take the security before the loan starts, that's fine. And therefore, that might be a good idea. And then in 12, we spoke about that when you took it as a security, the collateral you have as a security, you're not allowed to use it. And you also have to return it back and forth every time the person needs it. Whereas if it's payment, it becomes yours, and that's it. You don't have to return it. And then we spoke about bankruptcy, but a little out of order. We spoke about bankruptcy, and we explained that although halacha does not accept the idea of a debt discharge, it's not a halachic concept, but because we have a rule called the law of the land is the law, there could be some scope on how the bankruptcy discharge law could affect the debtor in this case, which would ultimately exempt him. And we brought that even though it's a benefit for society, and the government considers it a benefit of society, it's unclear amongst the poskim if that benefit of society will overweigh the requirement of repaying a loan. Some opinions are of the approach that the society is required it as a basic requirement to keep society in order, and therefore halacha needs to accept that. And some opinions don't accept that, and they say, no, okay, very nice, this is the law of the land, but it's contrary to Torah. And the Jewish borrower will still have to pay up his lender even after he filed for bankruptcy and the court had discharged his loan. Discharged his debt. But this is up for a discussion and a dispute amongst the poskim. All right, I think that's good for now, and I'll send an email of the recording, but also some things that we'll be preparing for next class, which Bezos Hashem will be on Wednesday. So, and I'll send what you should be learning for Bezrat Hashem.